Breaking news this Tuesday night, a violent assault on a Toronto streetcar. A young woman stabbed multiple times.
Suspect's a female in her 40s.
The rise of random acts of violence in Canada's biggest city as California police deal with yet another mass shooting.
Come here, hands up.
Ukraine's weapon Wish, the battle tank set to be deployed to the battle zone. Core findings, the unusual discovery unearthed about the center of our planet. And a triumphant solo trek all the way to the South Pole.
Being alone was for sure the worst part.
The Canadian cross-country skier who went cross-continental.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with some developing and worrying news in Toronto. Another person has been attacked on a streetcar in the middle of the day. The latest in a string of violent attacks, many of them random, in Canada's largest city. Police say a woman in her 20s was stabbed multiple times in the face and head while riding the streetcar about 2 p.m. in downtown Toronto. She is recovering from serious but non-life-threatening injuries. A suspect, a 40-year-old woman, was arrested shortly after, and police say they recovered a knife. Investigators do not believe the suspect and the victim knew each other. If it feels like you've heard a version of this story before, it's because you have. Random acts of violence are on the rise in Toronto. The question is, why? Mike Drolet has our top story tonight.
It was 6:20 p.m., 3 minutes until Alexander Steckel's bus was scheduled to arrive at her stop. She glanced down at her phone, unaware she was a target.
I was just standing there, and I felt something kind of just start hitting my chest, and I looked up. I got hit right in the face before I, registered what exactly was hitting me.
She looked up to see a car speeding away with what she believes was a teenager hanging out the window holding a pellet or airsoft gun.
All they said to me was, "You TTC."
Steckel was wearing her TTC uniform. A few hours earlier, 2 other TTC workers were riding in a bus in Scarborough when they were swarmed and beaten. Witnesses say they had asked a group of 10 to 15 rowdy teenagers to calm down.
And when they went to get off, apparently they grabbed the operators and dragged them off the bus with them. So it was really bad. And then when I got out here, the ambulance was already here and they were being treated, and one of them had like a gash on his forehead.
4 13-year-old boys have since been arrested and charged with assault. Random incidents like these are hard to prevent, but transit officials say they're far from isolated. Nor are they surprised. But with a noticeable increase in people who are homeless or suffering from mental health issues using the TTC as a shelter.
I can't explain how transit workers are feeling at risk and experiencing acts of violence in the city. This is not happening at this rate, at this degree, and it's not acceptable.
But it's not just on the TTC. Toronto has seen some horrific violence in recent months. A 37-year-old man has now been charged with manslaughter in the death of an 89-year-old woman whom he allegedly pushed to the ground last week. And just before Christmas, 59-year-old Ken Lee was beaten and stabbed to death outside a downtown shelter. 8 girls, ages 13 to 16, have been charged with second-degree murder. Toronto Mayor John Tory points to a growing social and mental health crisis as the cause. But he too is unsure of a solution that would make TTC workers like Alexander Steckel feel safe.
I mean, at this point, I think every day coming in, going home, I just have to be thankful to be alive.
Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
In California, it has happened again. Another mass shooting. This time, 7 people are dead. Police say an agricultural worker killed them in back-to-back shooting sprees at 2 mushroom farms. It's only January 24th, and already the toll from mass shootings in the U.S. is shocking. There have been 39 mass shootings across the U.S. this year, according to Gun Violence Archive, 5 of them in California, and at least 70 people have been killed. It is all hard to comprehend. Jackson Proskow on the latest shooting and the lack of hope anything will change.
The suspected mass shooter was arrested outside a sheriff's office while attempting to turn himself in. It happened after police were called to 2 separate scenes in Northern California, where they found 8 shooting victims, 7 of them dead.
All of the evidence we have points to this being the instance of workplace violence.
An exact motive isn't known. The gunfire erupted at a mushroom farm near the coastal city of Half Moon Bay, and later at a second agricultural facility. Investigators say the suspect, 66-year-old Chun-Li Zhao, worked at the farm, There were families and children living on the property.
I have 4 boys, and I cannot imagine what those kids witnessed today.
Most of the victims are believed to be migrant workers, making identification and notification of families more difficult.
We've never had one in this county of this many deaths at one scene or one time.
According to police, the semi-automatic handgun used was legally owned, adding to the sense of hopelessness in a state that has already experienced 5 mass shootings this month.
In the end, there are simply too many guns in this country, and there has to be a change. This is not an acceptable way for a modern society to live and conduct its affairs.
In the community of Monterey Park, a vigil was held Monday night for the 11 victims of a shooting at a Lunar New Year party in a dance studio. Victims like owner Meng Wai Ma and Mei Mei Nan, who were leaving just as the gunman arrived.
She got in the car with her partner. She was backing up, and she stopped when she saw a person. Then that's when the shooter went to her side of the window and shot her.
The senselessness of both attacks has left behind a feeling that no place is safe, not when there is so little political will to stem the tide of gun violence gripping America. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
A big development in arming Ukraine. There are reports Germany's chancellor has agreed to send Leopard 2 tanks, the much sought-after battle tank Ukraine has been pleading for. It is a U-turn for the chancellor, who had rejected the idea of sending lethal weapons, wanting Washington to take the first step in sending heavy armor. And it paves the way for other countries with German-made tanks to send them too. Redmond Shannon explains what's changed and what it means.
The German-made Leopard 2 tank is used by more than a dozen European countries and by Canada. But Berlin needs to give approval before any other armies can export their Leopards to Ukraine. Poland's Prime Minister says he has now formally requested approval. Mateusz Morawiecki says Poland and other nations are already training Ukrainian soldiers to use the tanks. He accused Berlin of delaying and dodging on the decision. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz will ultimately make the call, his reluctance likely influenced by Germany's history.
The last time that German tanks were rolling across this land was during World War II. And, some German leaders have said that they don't want there to be the optics of once again, a German tank rolling across Ukraine.
NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg appeared to apply pressure on a visit to Berlin.
Battle tanks are, of course, important, both to be able to repel Russian new offensives, but also for Ukraine to be able to retake territory.
Later on Monday, news reports indicated Germany will now export Leopard 2s and will also approve others to do the same. Canada has 112 of the tanks. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was asked about them on Monday.
We have nothing to announce today, but we'll continue to look at how best Canada can help.
US media, meanwhile, report that Washington will send some of its Abrams tanks too.
Sending those to Ukraine is going to be a lot more difficult to do than sending Leopard tanks.
It could take months to fully deploy the complex Abrams tanks. Any official announcements will likely provoke a strong response from the Kremlin. Russia's foreign minister said Monday that the West and Russia have now moved beyond a hybrid war to almost a real war. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Ukraine isn't just asking for military aid, but financial help too, an ask made more difficult after more than a dozen top Ukrainian officials were fired today. Some, though not all, are linked to allegations of corruption. A deputy defense minister and deputy prosecutor general are among those let go. No details were given, but there are allegations of stealing money and paying inflated prices to feed troops. Ukraine is under intense pressure to prove it can properly handle billions in Western aid. It is the biggest shakeup of Ukraine's wartime leadership since Russia launched the invasion. In the U.S., a retired FBI agent is out on bail after pleading not guilty to charges of violating Russian sanctions and money laundering. Charles McGonigal spent 22 years with the FBI. Prosecutors allege he concealed hundreds of thousands of dollars he received in exchange for trying to help a Russian oligarch get off the sanctions list. McGonigal is also suspected of helping investigate a Russian rival of that oligarch and concealing involvement through shell companies and forged documents. If you've tried to buy a concert ticket lately, you know what it can cost. Well, now a U.S. Senate committee hearing is looking into whether the merger of Live Nation and Ticketmaster has stifled competition.
The only way to restore competition in this industry is to break up Ticketmaster and Live Nation.
In mid-November, Ticketmaster's website crashed during a pre-sale event for Taylor Swift's upcoming tour. Many have slammed the company's lack of transparency and inability to block bot purchases of tickets. Today, the head of Live Nation apologized to fans but blamed the fiasco on bots.
We were then hit with 3 times the amount of bot traffic that we'd ever experienced. And for the first time in 400 verified fan on sales, they came after our verified fan password servers as well.
In 2010, Live Nation, the biggest concert venue operator, and Ticketmaster, the biggest ticketing system, merged. Experts say the company controls more than 70% of the market for ticketing and live events. Canadians trying to keep up with the climbing cost of living. Coming up, what the Prime Minister and his cabinet have to say about the year ahead. In Alberta, an organization investigating missing children and unmarked burial sites says it's discovered what it calls physical and documented evidence of genocide. Its preliminary report, released today, looked into the Blue Quills Indian Residential School in Saddle Lake Cree Nation. Morgan Black was at today's announcement. Morgan.
The report's goal is to provide community members with an in-depth look into the operations of the former Blue Quill Residential School. Eric Large, a residential school survivor, is the lead investigator and says Catholic Church records obtained by the Atchimowin Opaskview Society show 212 children died at the school. The group says a more accurate number is now nearly 400. Records show children died of tuberculosis, contracted from drinking unpasteurized raw cow's milk from the livestock kept on site. Investigators suggest school administration knew this would not be best for the children's health, as none of the staff contracted the disease, according to records.
This was done recklessly at the hands of the school administrators, who are all now dead. And the Department of Indian Affairs did not impose safety measures for these children.
Next year, surveying with ground-penetrating radar continues. The group says the results of a final report is still quite a ways away. Morgan Black, Global News, St. Paul, Alberta.
Canadians will find out tomorrow if there will be another hike in the Bank of Canada rate. The rising cost of living is front and center as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his cabinet hold a retreat. As Turia Isri reports, there are more warnings of tough times ahead.
The Liberals are admitting the next 12 months may be even bumpier than predicted.
I've said very clearly, as is the Prime Minister, 23 is a turbulent year.
Steering the country through that turbulence is the focus of the cabinet retreat in Hamilton.
We still have fiscal room to be able to do the things we need to do, but the fiscal room has tightened.
The government may have to make some difficult choices.
We spoke very much about the challenges ahead. There is a lot of uncertainty, a lot of volatility in the global economy.
A new report from the Business Council of Canada underlines there is a high risk that the government will not be able to deliver the services it promised Canadians in Budget 2022. One of those promises is a long-awaited healthcare funding deal between the federal government and provinces. That economic risk looms as the Bank of Canada is expected to announce the 8th interest rate hike in a row Wednesday.
We don't want more interest rates increases than are absolutely necessary to get back to where we need to go. And one of the reasons is household debt is just so high.
The Conservatives accuse the government of adding to the rising cost of living.
They accumulated $400 billion during the pandemic, where 40% had nothing to do with the pandemic spending at all. So we see reckless spending.
While there are few details on how the Liberals plan to tackle the economic slowdown, there were some specifics on the passport backlog. It came to a head last spring when Canadians camped out in passport offices. The government says the worst of the backlog is behind them.
We are delivering between 95 and 98% of the time within those service standards. And so Canadians can have confidence that they should be able to get their passport on time.
We knew that pent-up demand on travel was going to happen. The borders were closed. People were going to travel. So the fact that a year and a half later they're doing a bit of a victory lap on this, to me, is a bit disingenuous.
As the Liberals work on their strategy for the return to Parliament, one thing political watchers will be looking for is campaign-style rhetoric, and whether Justin Trudeau may face off against Pierre Poilievre earlier than 2025. Donna?
All right, we'll watch for that. Turia Isri in Hamilton, Ontario. Thanks. Center of attention ahead, why the Earth's core might be changing direction. Well, you may have read the ominous-sounding headlines about the Earth's core, that it has stopped rotating and may be reversing direction. It certainly sounds alarming, but apparently it's not. We asked Eric Sorensen to dig deep and figure out what it means for our planet's future.
Beneath the crust, below the mantle, and underneath the molten core is the hot, dense, solid inner core of our planet. And scientists now believe it rotates, and it even changes direction every 60 years or so, a planet within the planet.
There's a very strong magnetic field down there. It's pressure and gravity and the magnetic field that all have to balance.
We can't drill straight down to the Earth's center. It's around 3,000 kilometers through the mantle just to the outer core. But scientists at Peking University in China found that seismic waves from earthquakes showed the Earth's core rotating, but also slowing down, and that it stopped just over 10 years ago and appears to be picking up speed, rotating now in the other direction. So what could that mean for the magnetic forces in and around the Earth? There's a powerful but delicate balance among the magnetic forces of the Sun, the Earth, and our planet's inaccessible interior. A magnetic field protects us from the Sun's radiation. We see the interaction of the solar wind and our magnetic fields in the northern lights. The study's authors suggest the core rotation fits with the 60 to 70-year patterns on the Earth's surface, shifting sea levels, global mean temperatures, potentially tiny changes to the length of the day, an ebb and flow between the inner Earth and the surface.
It will fall to the ground.
We've long tried to understand the forces beneath us.
In other words, it will fall in this direction, toward the center of the Earth.
And when Hollywood heard about it,
the core of the Earth has stopped spinning.
Well, you can guess how that turns out.
Microwaves will literally cook our planet.
Without its internal convection, Mars lost its magnetic field, its heat, and went cold. That is not happening here. But if we can predict the subtle shifts down below, we could ultimately prepare for the effects up above. Though John Vidali says much of the science remains speculative.
These mineral physics people need to explore what happens at a boundary between liquid iron and solid iron. So a whole range of possibilities of things that might be happening.
It will take time and new modeling to better understand what's happening. What can be said, now that we've discovered that the Earth's core changes directions at regular intervals, is that apparently that's a good thing. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Crossing a continent next, the Canadian skier who trekked to the South Pole in record-breaking time. When you return from a trek through Antarctica, just about every place feels like a five-star hotel. That is what endurance athlete Caroline Côté discovered. The Quebecer is just back in Canada after setting a new record on a trek to the South Pole. On December 9th, the 36-year-old explorer set off solo from the edge of Antarctica. She cross-country skied 1,130 kilometers in 34 days. Her goal was to take on one of the most inaccessible places in the world, and she did. Though, as Mike Armstrong explains, the only part she wasn't prepared for was the hardest part.
These are kind of the official final steps of Caroline Côté's epic journey. The silver ball represents the South Pole, and she touched it with slightly frostbitten fingers.
I was lucky to just have a little bit of my hand. I don't feel much on my fingers.
Now, when you've lived through this, you don't complain much about a bit of frostbite because it could have been worse. Côté crossed one of the most remote and harshest parts of the planet. The temperature averaged in the -30s with wind. If she wasn't in her tent, she had to keep moving to keep her body heat up.
Antarctica is kind of a land of extreme.
Côté trained for the trip. In 2022, she crossed Greenland with a group. Physically, it was similar. She had to pull all her supplies on a sled. But mentally, being with other people, she says, was much easier. Solitude isn't really something you can train for.
I felt really alone. I felt that I was not prepared for that. I'm starting the day. My location is this one.
Well, Cote pushed on. She did deal with some problems, a broken binding on a ski and a broken solar panel she needed to charge things like her GPS device.
Oh, there she is.
But there was a moment that recharged Cote herself.
Oh, wow, she's waving.
This was her boyfriend flying over.
No way.
At this point, Cote still had 111 kilometers left.
It gave me a lot of strength to continue, to do the kilometers and also to do them fast because I wanted to be with them and to celebrate.
Now back in Montreal, Cote says she finds herself appreciating simple things like the sounds and smells of the city. She also finds herself talking a lot.
I'm with people, I'm surrounded with my family, so it's so good to be with humans.
Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
An accomplishment. That is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is this bighorn sheep in Okanagan Falls, British Columbia. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.